Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Good Source election coverage. This is our first one. We've got a brand new studio that's been constructed, but the weather conspired against us, and we had no internet and no electricity for most of this afternoon. And so we've been scrambling to try and get ready as the power has just come back on very recently. And of course, we've been doing our own election coverage while waiting for it in the dark amongst ourselves, making all the right predictions. And I'm sorry you missed out on those. But joining me tonight, I'm Dave Pello, and joining me is Lyle Shelton.
Evening, Dave.
And Bernard Gaynor.
G'day, Dave. G'day, everyone.
And also joining us from her electorate office is the member for... Where is it, Lyle?
Maroochydore.
I wasn't sure that was an actual electorate. There's so many different names these days, but Fiona Simpson. So thank you so much for joining us tonight, Fiona.
My pleasure.
Now, how do you feel the LNP's results are going tonight? Is there anything significant that you think we can take from this already?
Look, to be frank, I've been very focused on my own seat, which the reality is if I don't do that, you don't have any opportunity of winning government. So my focus has been first and foremost to make sure that I don't lose ground and let my team down. So I've just literally come off standing on pre-poll booths for the last 2 weeks. And then today, it's been a really bizarre election. I would have to say that the results, how many votes have been cast, the estimate of the votes cast today on an election day is a record low as far as a proportionate vote. And so you really will see not only in today's result, but in the results that come through in the ballots that are counted up to 11 o'clock tonight, quite a lot of votes cast in the last 2 weeks rather than today. So how do I feel about the election result? Well, firstly, I'm very grateful for the support in my own area, but I do understand that it's not looking good for us across the state. And for that, obviously, I'm very disappointed.
Well, Fiona, it's Lyle Shelton here. Thank you so much for giving your time tonight. And congratulations on your win tonight. I know you said at the outset you've been focused on your own seat. You've won it well again. You're one of the longest serving members of the parliament, and you fended off a strong local challenge there, obviously popular. But it's been a disappointing night for the LNP. Did you expect the Palaszczuk government to be looking at a third term this time of the night already?
Look, there's time to do the proper analysis. You have all the facts. There's a few things we can assume at this point, and I'm more than happy to move beyond just some of the initial gut feel about what's happened. I do think that the last 6 months we've seen a situation where every broadcast has been dominated by the global pandemic, and that just unfortunately obliterated a lot of the other issues that will be with us for longer than the pandemic. The legacy of the pandemic will be economic and social. Sorry, just saying goodbye to some of my workers who've been slaving away for me. Will be the legacy of the pandemic is going to be with us, potentially even generationally. And I think tonight's not the night for me to offer I think a full analysis, because we'll have the opportunity to do that subsequently. But there's no doubt when every news broadcast just about has been dominated by a worldwide pandemic, it's very hard to move the focus of the discussion beyond the immediate fear of how people's lives are impacted to how do we rebuild tomorrow? How do we focus on not just today's challenges, but tomorrow's Herculean challenges? And I think that's the challenge we now have, is that there has to be a rebuild. There still has to be a rebuild of people's lives, the economy, and socially. and it would be a mistake to see that the results are an endorsement of the legacy of what's happened with the government, the state Labor government. But it is, I think, a recognition that with the fear and the and disruption and distress that COVID's caused, it's certainly interrupted also the discussion about other issues that perhaps would have seen a very different result.
Yeah, I think that's really well said, Fiona. This has definitely been the COVID election. As you said earlier, record low numbers of people at polling booths. I was on polling booths today down in the Redlands area, helping out my good friend, Dr. Mark Robinson. And certainly the booths were very, very slow. How does the, and I appreciate that you're wanting to be just a little bit circumspect about offering too much analysis on the way forward, but just, a brief sort of thought, how does the LNP begin to rebuild from this? You talked about society rebuilding. What does the party do now? It's a 4-year term, first ever 4-year term for a state government in Queensland. Quite a bit of time ahead. What's the way forward from here?
I'm going to tell a little story of a gentleman I met on a polling booth today, and his life was already in distress before COVID. He'd already lost his home and lost his business, and Queensland already had a lot of financial pressures before COVID. He was very well dressed, well spoken, and then as he shared, I found that he was living in his car, and I'm so pleased he shared that story with me, because as I realised that, you realise it's not a game. People's lives and the distress that they're in, and this was before COVID. I tell this story because I have a genuine concern that what we see coming is a need for us as a community. I certainly have beliefs as a member of the LNP that to have strong health, strong education and strong social systems, you've got to have a strong economy as well. And I am concerned that we have a big road to tread, not just as a party but as a community, because that chap I saw today living in his car was, I think, evidence that there is a lot of distress in our community, and we're only seeing a tip of the iceberg. That was before COVID. And so how we help people through the distress and the challenges and the mental barriers of overcoming what is going to be, I think, the challenge for all of us. So we will reflect on how do we rebuild as an LNP, but today I want to reflect on how do we rebuild our community? How do we help those people who've been through living hell? Because we want people to prosper, to have safety, to have health, to do well in our community. There's a big road ahead, and we need to work hard in order to provide them with the solutions and the help that they need.
Well said, Fiona.
Fiona, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We're sorry that it's been a little bit higgledy-piggledy with the weather and everything. We're working on an amazing set, basically donated by the Good Source supporters, but nonetheless, not quite all the assets that we needed. It's been very generous of you to join at short notice.
And I appreciate your time. Take care.
Thanks, Fiona. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Well, joining us also tonight is Bernard Gaynor. Bernard, the results tonight, what's in the tea leaves? So clearly the LNP have lost, they've been devastated. What do you think are the lessons they should be taking away from tonight?
Well, I think the most important thing is that this election has been a COVID election. It's been a referendum on the government's information they put out about COVID, and the electorate has decided that COVID is a problem, and they voted for the safety, I guess you can say, that Anastasia Palaszczuk said she was offering them. I think there's some real issues to take out of this looking forward into the way governments across the world have used this crisis, for want of a better term. I think there has been a scare campaign and a fear campaign in Queensland. It's been in Victoria. We've seen it work in the Northern Territory and the ACT. It's worked obviously tonight here in Queensland. On Tuesday, we'll see another election result. I think it's going to be a different election result, and I think Conservatives in general need to look at the way they campaign and the way they get their message out to the population. And I think we're going to see a very clear distinction between this election here in Queensland, which is generally considered one of the most conservative states in Australia, and the election in the US. One election has been, you could say, a disaster for conservative politics, and another election I'm pretty confident is going to prove that Conservatives can win. Obviously, there are some similarities. Trump is the incumbent in America, Anastasia Palaszczuk was incumbent here as well. And I think there is something in these times where the incumbents are successful. But yeah, it's a referendum on COVID, and the Queensland people have decided that Anastasia Palaszczuk has protected them, and that's what's got her over the line.
Yeah, I think Bernard's quite right, David. And Fiona's picked it up, and right from the get-go as we go forward with this very first good source election analysis, we're finding ourselves, talking about COVID. We've come onto the live feed, and it's clear Anastasia Palaszczuk has won that third historic term. She's gone from being the accidental premier back in 2015 when they beat Campbell Newman, and to the point now where this COVID thing has really protected her, and people have forgotten that going into this election, the state had the highest unemployment in the country, the record bankruptcies, and of course on social issues, they've been terrible. They legalised abortion all the way to birth. They've made it compulsory for children to be taught that their gender is fluid, and yet the community has rewarded them for an appalling economic record and social record. So everything's been obscured by this crisis. And I suppose in one sense you can understand people being worried about COVID, but I think it's been politicised to the government's advantage.
Yeah, it's a complete disappointment. I think most people right of centre would be, I would hope most people right of centre would be disappointed that the state would base the next 4 years of government on someone who claims to do nothing more than what the chief health medical officer says. It's like, well, why do we even need you as premier if some mid-level bureaucrat's going to be running the state?
I think you can see the disappointment in Fiona Simpson's voice there. She was obviously picking up the pain in the community that's affected people personally, like the gentleman living in his car. That pain is real, and people have felt that as they voted. The challenge for the LNP now is how they come back from this, and obviously Fiona, she obviously acknowledged they've got to rebuild, but that's going to be a big challenge. But there's 4 years, so it's a long road ahead.
Well, just on that, so if you cast your mind back to May 2019, the coalition basically swept Queensland. It was a disaster zone for the Labor Party, and
this is federally,
and none of the conditions that led to that election result have changed. Now, I know Dave and I were talking before we went to air, and Dave made the point, and I think it's a good point, that Queensland tends to vote differently at state elections than it does federally. But I still think that the coalition had an opportunity following the federal election to really drive home some of the problems with the Labor Party. And those problems have not gone away. In fact, they're only going to get worse. So, for instance, we've seen Jackie Trad has lost her seat tonight in the seat of South Brisbane. And I'm sure all of you at home can give a big cheer. Jackie Trad's gone, and we should celebrate that.
Hooray.
But all that's brought in is a person who is even more rabid than Jackie Trad when it comes to things like the Adani mines and development in the regions, energy in Queensland. And that should be an opportunity for the LNP to drive home a message that if you want growth, prosperity, not for big business, but for families in Queensland, you're not going to get it from Labor or the Greens.
This is the thing, isn't it? I mean, what we've seen here, as you said, Jackie Trad turfed out in South Brisbane, the Greens romping it in. It looks like the Green Michael Berkman in the seat of Maiwar is going to increase his majority. McConnell, Grace, Palaszczuk's education minister. You wouldn't find a Labor person more green, if I could say that about a Labor. So this is the woman who stood up and said that children have to be taught that their gender is fluid, held up the gender-bread person because of so-called marriage equality. She has been ousted by a Green tonight. I mean, what we're seeing is a bit of a Green slide in inner city Brisbane, and the population, and we're talking about the leafy suburbs, more affluent areas turning green. These are the people who should be the ones who would normally be on the side of jobs and prosperity and economic development, but they're actually going for a party, which, as you said, Bernard, is against all those things, wants to kneecap the mining industry, the things that drive wealth in this state and drive the wealth back into the cities.
Yeah. Look, you were talking about the LNP needing to have a look at where this went wrong. I think this has been wrong for decades. And the problem is that we have people like Deb Frecklington coming out with policies about climate change instead of prosecuting the conservative thing, and instead of calling out Anastasia Palaszczuk for her euthanasia policy and providing a stark and resolute opposition to that kind of pernicious social agenda, that they keep fluffing around and trying to compete in green territory where they're never ever going to win. They're competing for votes at the ABC, and they haven't got a chance of winning the ABC's votes.
Well, I just want to say a couple of things on that. So with Deb Frecklington, you're not going to find probably many more vocal critics of the Green Labor social agenda than you will sitting around this table. But I think, in fairness to Deb Frecklington, tonight's election was going to be a very difficult election to win, because if you look at the last 8 months, it has been Anastasia Palaszczuk holding a press conference. That's been the government in Queensland for 8 months. The opposition could have been a brilliant opposition or a terrible opposition, but they're just not getting coverage. And I think if you look, most people don't watch TV for their news anymore.
Well, see, I think that was another opportunity. Deb Frecklington really fluffed it. She had an opportunity to provide a contrast again to a Labor-led government. And when she had the chance to talk about COVID, she also just parroted this most annoying, robotic, acerebral line saying, "I will do whatever the chief health officers, we'll take the chief medical officers." Look, stop it, Deb. This is your chance to finally talk about COVID, where the spotlight has been for 8 months. Why don't you come out and be different? Not just for the sake of difference, but because you're a conservative, you're right-wing, you're liberal, as opposed to the illiberal laws we've been living under for 8 months. How about you say, yes, we're going to open the borders, because guess what? It's not only the chief medical officer's decision. We've also got the economy. We've got so many other aspects of people's health being ignored. It's not just about
COVID.
but
I just want to make this point. I'm not disagreeing with you in large part about the way the campaign may be run, but if Deb Frecklington had done everything that you wanted her to do, I still think it would have been a very difficult election for the LNP to win, because they're just oppositions around the world have been shut out of politics. They've been shut out of the media cycle. It has been ruled by press conference. We've seen this especially in Victoria, but it's been in Queensland as well. And the only person in all of politics and in all of government who's getting any coverage anywhere is the person who is the Premier and the Chief Health Officer standing next to them.
Yeah, I think those factors are very real.
I'm cutting, but just like those social issues you talked about, Lyle, like abortion, euthanasia, which now looks like it's going to come into Queensland. Those issues have been completely swept aside by this whole focus on COVID. Well, I think they just have not been talked about really during the campaign.
Well, I think the reality is those issues, and we're all passionate social conservatives, those issues haven't been talked about for decades, really, and those issues haven't been prosecuted in the mainstream of politics in this nation. You compare, the US election. I don't want to get sort of too sidetracked on that, because that's for next week, and we want to talk about tonight. But you see Mike Pence and Kamala Harris having a substantive debate in the vice presidential debates about human rights for the unborn, and a really, really serious and even respectful debate. You just don't see that here in Australian politics. I think the thing that we have to face up to as economic and social conservative is the electorate don't seem to care. And when you have a crisis like this pandemic, they're completely focused on that. They've rewarded the government that they think has kept them safe. They've ignored the big economic issues, the $120 billion worth of debt, the record bankruptcies, the fact that Queensland was becoming the economic laughingstock of the country. And they've completely ignored the social issues that we have been concerned about. Even if they had been prosecuted perhaps more fully, I think they still would have been washed away in this COVID thing. And that's the challenge that those of us who are social and economic conservatives have, because the electorate just don't seem to care about debt, human rights, and certainly are happy to experiment with something as radical as euthanasia.
And if the LNP is going to change anything at the next election 4 years from now, what it has to change is it has to become the Conservative Party. It has to stop being afraid of being conservatives, excluding them from its ranks, from its members, excluding former Conservatives, excluding those people, while they have absolutely no filter whatsoever for progressive members. They say it's a broad church and they invite everybody in, but the people who are excluded, it's like they're afraid of this label being far right. Meanwhile, they're embracing the membership which is far left. And that then tells in the campaign they run. They're afraid to lead the electorate, lead the state, and say, hey, while the media and Labor are telling you to look over here and ignoring things like the budget, we also want to draw your attention to the fact that they are racing and galloping towards a social cliff with all of these values, and they're not able to prosecute these arguments.
Well, I think we do have to find a place in Australian politics, whether it's on the left or the right, where the truth can be told. And the reality is a big swathe of voters in Brisbane, in Maiwar, we're talking Indooroopilly, Toowong, Figtree Pocket, these sort of areas. McConnell, Grace's electorate, and obviously South Brisbane. And the more broader swing towards the left of politics. This happening and people not ever having heard the arguments that you can't run a state's economy on windmills and solar panels and battery storage. It just doesn't exist. Even the CFMEU came out last week and told the Labor caucus in Canberra that you can't run an economy on this. But you don't hear this being prosecuted in the public square. You don't hear, we didn't really hear a fulsome debate about what Jackie Tradd's abortion to birth laws does. Most people, sadly, would support abortion to some level. But when you say abortion to birth, everyone I've talked to, religious or not, recoil at that and go, that's a bit far, but that's what they did.
And you have the health minister lying about what the legislation
the health
actually
minister,
says.
Stephen Miles, in the campaign lying about it. You don't have the
inability to prosecute.
Well, this is the thing. We had a big inquiry, parliamentary inquiry into euthanasia, and yet you don't hear from the palliative care experts who say that you don't need to give people lethal injection. Yep. You can actually give them a death with dignity, with proper palliative care, and it's woefully underfunded. And yet we are racing to this solution. But this is never talked about, and of course the electorate seems to be buying these things based on ignorance.
So just on that, I just want to be careful in saying the electorate don't seem to care. I think we do have a problem in that large parts of the electorate, especially the younger population, has been, I think, very poorly educated and don't think about these issues. But I just don't think it's true to say they don't care about these issues. It's just that what has been presented to them this year is that if you don't vote for Anastasia Palaszczuk, you're all going to die. And that's the message that has just been bombarded for 8 months. Now, and obviously that message has worked. Yep. But if you believe that COVID is going to kill everybody, then all these other issues become very minor very quickly. Yep. And I think that is the reality of Queensland tonight. The message, COVID is going to kill you, and Anastasia Palaszczuk is the only thing protecting your life. And as much as, I'll see the ads, I go to places where people carry on like they're about to die. If you don't get your temperature checked, or you don't social distance, from your own wife, people are obviously afraid. And I think there's a real problem there that needs to be looked at. The power of the government to put out this propaganda, the power of the media, which is putting out, as I'm going to keep going to Tuesday because that's the beacon of hope. Fake news has just been pumped out for months. And Anastasia Palaszczuk, she appears like the nice girl next door from Inala. She has ruthlessly exploited COVID to scare Queenslanders into giving her another term of parliament.
Well, it's worked, Dave. And I just wonder if I could mention, some of the key seats that we thought were going to
Let's
you know,
start having a
perhaps-
look at the seats and go through perhaps some of the ones
Yeah.
that the LNP needed to win.
Well, they needed to win the seat of Mansfield, and
Yep.
they had a superstar candidate there in Janet Wishart.
Yeah.
You know, that seat I think had a margin of about 1.3% or something like this.
1.6.
1.6. Super margin. It was a must win if the LNP were to retain
The
government.
slightest bit of a swing, and they should have picked that
And
up.
Janet ran a fantastic campaign there. She's someone to watch in the future. I hope she has another go, but she's lost there. Down in Redlands, Henry Pike. Now, it wasn't sort of on the target seat list, but certainly one that was deemed very, very winnable. I think around about a 3% margin there. Henry door-knocked 10,000 houses in that Redlands issue. That area, sort of around Victoria Point.
That is hard work.
Hard work, lost a lot of weight, got a suntan, and yet because of COVID, he hasn't come within a bull's roar. I think the LNP, you know, their strategists will be very disappointed. Kirralie Bolton in Springwood, another tougher seat, hasn't got close there. And of course, up in North Queensland, the party's not doing.
So Henry
well
Pike in Redlands was on about 34%. Compared to Kim Richards, the incumbent, with 43%.
Yeah, now she's been rewarded. She had, very public problems in her local branch, allegations of financial misappropriation, branch members going to the CCC.
Wow.
And yet she survives this.
Bernie, is it a COVID referendum?
Oh, absolutely. This has been a referendum on COVID. I keep saying it. Anastasia Palaszczuk has ruthlessly exploited the fear that she has created.
That's fair commentary.
To get herself another term of government. And, while it is disappointing for Conservatives what's happening tonight, you look across the board, I don't think LNP are going to pick up any seats. I think Greens are going to pick up seats, and that's going to bring problems as well. But people have voted for protection, and they think they're getting protection from Anastasia Palaszczuk. But over the long term, I think that the COVID fatigue is going to come, and it's going to come very rapidly. And then unfortunately, I guess Queensland are going to be stuck with a hangover from what's happened tonight. But it is a referendum on COVID.
Well, they're going to be stuck with a green hangover, Bernie, and you just said it really well. I mean, I'm just sort of absorbing this, but you think about there's going to be 3 Greens in the unicameral Queensland Parliament. Now, wherever we've seen Greens get a foothold in Parliament, state or federal, they metastasise and they drag the whole body politic further to the extreme left, starting with Labor. So,
so just on the Greens, they've definitely got South Brisbane and Maiwar. I think they're going to win Cooper.
McConnell, I think.
No, Cooper. Greens, I think, are going to win Cooper.
So is that a fourth? You're calling a fourth?
No, because I think they're going to struggle in McConnell, but they might. McConnell's going to be very tight, so we could end up with 4.
The Greens are on 56% in McConnell. Two-party preferred, Labor 44. That's according to the electoral. That's with 47% of the vote counted.
Yeah, I think
we'd have to call that for the Greens, wouldn't we?
Well, let me just look at the latest numbers here in McConnell.
That's McConnell, yeah.
I would not call McConnell for the Greens, because I think they're currently in 3rd position, and they're going to have. They're in 3rd position by 2%, according to the results I'm looking at, and there's only 2.5% of minor vote below that. They're going to have to get all those preferences, and one of them is Clive Palmer's. One Nation. So look, I would not call McConnell, but I think they're going to win Cooper. But I think one thing that the LNP will need to look at is this decision to preference the Greens ahead of Labor. Now, I think that makes sense in a seat like South Brisbane. If I was running the LNP, every election I would preference Greens, and then the next election I'll preference Labor, and I'll keep that member to a 1-term member. That's what you can do in South Brisbane. But to preference the Greens ahead of Labor across the board tonight, I don't think it's going to happen, but it certainly risked tonight having a Labor-Green minority government, which would have been even worse than a Labor government.
Yep.
I think all it does is put Greens into Parliament unnecessarily, and as much as Labor is a problem, the less time and airplay the Greens can get, the better for everybody.
And this is the thing, they're going to have a megaphone now. with increased numbers, and whether it's 2 or 3, they're going to have a megaphone in that Queensland Parliament, and that's going to be a problem for everyone. I hope it's an opportunity for people to realise what they truly stand for as they seek to prosecute their debate. It's going to mean higher taxes, higher energy prices. It's going to mean even more radical social policy. They're going to push euthanasia through in February, but mark my words, there'll be a push for legalising drugs, for cannabis. We've just seen that defeated in a referendum in New Zealand. But the Greens and Labor and the ACT here in Australia, they have managed to legalise cannabis for recreational use. I'll bet that will be the next thing the Greens will roll out in this term of Parliament.
I'm just going to make a radical prediction here from this, because you're seeing up to 4 Greens. I don't think it's going to be 4, probably 3 in Parliament from inner city Brisbane. At the same time, you're seeing Katter's Australian Party has done very, very well in the seats it's contested in, especially in the seats where it had members. So when they get elected, they stick in North Queensland. So you've got 2 very different contrasts there. And the people of North Queensland essentially are going to be told that their social and economic future is going to be decided by an increasingly green Parliament centred in Brisbane. And Labor, one of the things Labor's going to have to walk away from tonight is working out how do we retain seats in the city of Brisbane from this green threat. And I predict they're going to go even further to the left to try and stem the bleeding, you could say. So this is my prediction. North Queensland, there is going to be a push over the next 5-10 years. The way this continues, there is going to be a very strong push for a separate state in North Queensland, because the people up there just won't cop it.
Yeah. There already is a very strong movement for that, and they're going to get more and more
It's going to happen.
It's the parts of Queensland are ruled further away from Brisbane than Brisbane is from Sydney. It's very dislocated. Look, we're going to bring Steve Kyler onto the panel in just a moment to give us some analysis of the seats as they go. But before we do, Lyle,
sorry, mate, I was just stepping off.
Just to get ready. Before we do, I want to have a chat about the seat of South Brisbane and the strategy of the LNP to get rid of Jackie Trad. Exactly, is it a deal breaker? We're probably going to see a majority Labor government. Was it worth getting rid of Jackie Trad at any cost? Obviously, it was going to result in another Greens member. Personally, I think so. I just think whatever it takes to get rid of somebody, I think the rabid Green is better than the one that's hiding as a Labor member.
Look, I think that's right. I've been torn over this issue since the LNP announced it. I think as far back as 2018, it was a long-term strategy that they had, that they were going to preference the Greens ahead of Jackie Trad there. And it's worked. And I'm not good enough with the numbers to know whether she would have been turfed out anyway, but certainly those LNP preferences have tipped it over. The question is, do you have someone who is in effect a Green sitting around the cabinet table? And I would call Jackie Trad a Green for all intents and purposes, certainly on a social policy,
absolutely,
her economic policy. This is the person who, held up the Adani mine, bringing up, things like the black-throated finch, a bird that's available in abundant populations. They held up the development of the Ackland New Hope mine. This is someone who puts a stick in the spoke of economic development. And then, of course, we've talked about her abortion to birth law. She's the one who had a party, first anniversary party at a swank bar in West End to celebrate the killing of unborn babies and the coercion of women to have abortions by men. Terrible, terrible piece of work. So I'm torn between seeing her out of the Parliament, but as we were saying earlier, we now have the Greens with a very secure foothold in the Queensland Legislative Assembly, and I don't think that's going to bode well for the people of Queensland. Maybe as people see what these people really, really are and what their agenda is, it might be a wake-up call. Whether that happens in 4 years, I don't know. I think we're going to pay a big price for having Greens in the Parliament.
I'm fascinated by Bernie's idea of alternating the preferences in South Brisbane. that you won't punish whoever.
Look, I think once you've got a Green, the Greens will be in South Brisbane forever. I mean, they haven't been able to get Adam Bant out of the seat of Melbourne.
Well,
in
the Greens
federal
in
Parliament.
South Brisbane
Once they get a foothold, they're there.
They've picked up 9% swing.
Yeah, there you go.
In this election.
Look, I live in South Brisbane, in West End, and it's been green everywhere. It's almost like Jackie has hardly been campaigning. There was only some presence for her really in the last fortnight. I think it's been a lazy campaign on her part in terms of visibility. As someone who lives and works in that electorate, it's almost like she'd already given up.
Well, not a moment too soon.
Should we talk about, before I step off and let Steve come, our good friend Mark Robinson and Oodgeroo, and Steve will probably have good numbers there.
Yeah,
but, he's been fighting off a really strong campaign from an independent, Claire Richardson, who
Zali Steggall style independent.
Exactly. And we
Not
saw
so
this,
independent.
Well, and this is the thing. She launched her campaign back in June with the same sort of aqua teal colouring that Zali used to try and knock off Tony Abbott. I think it's a great credit to Mark Robinson. If these people think he's such a threat, they've got to deploy those sort of tactics.
That same kind of campaign is deserving a former Prime Minister.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, Mark being one of the really good guys in the Parliament, strong pro-life, one of the few principled men in the Parliament.
I'm happy to say...
I need to declare my interest. I've been working part-time for Mark, and that's been a privilege to do so.
And likewise, this show, the channel Good Source, it has a great fondness for Mark Robinson. My personal show, Pillow Talk, the first episode ever had Mark Robinson on.
There you go, yeah.
And I think more candidates like him, more leadership like his would see LNP victories more often, would see Queensland not falling for the leftist lies that we see from Labor.
Well, I think that's right. And he certainly made that a very safe seat over 10 or 11 years.
And he's increased the swing. It looks like he's up by 0.5%.
Well, Claire Richardson, that Zali Steggall independent, running on that sort of single issue, Toondah Harbour issue. It's a big local development issue down there. And quite a mischievous campaign. I'm quite happy to say that. She has polled about 21% of the vote. Mark is clinging on by the skin of his teeth, but it's going to be a tough one. It's about 36% of the vote counted. So we'll certainly be upholding Mark in our prayers and really hoping that he does hang on in what has been a really tough fight.
It seems like they're predicting that he will hang on. So, he's done well in that seat in every single election. Against predictions, against all odds, and despite being an outspoken, strong conservative,
unapologetic,
and that's the lesson for the LNP. You don't lose elections by being a strong conservative.
He's done both. He's been able to walk and chew gum. I've worked 2 days a week in his office for the last up until June this year. And I've seen what he does at a grassroots level. He looks after his community. He's right on top of the local issues. But he's uncompromising on the values. And he's never been marked down by the local community because he's been pro-life. He's stood up against the gender fluid stuff.
And the leftists, the ABC Labor Party, have absolutely gone after him.
They have gone after him. The Guardian.
They've gone after his conservative values. They've gone after his pro-life convictions. And it hasn't been the Achilles heel that the LNP clearly think it is. That is
a big misnomer. If you're a good, strong local member, as Mark is, grassroots politician, and you have convictions on these issues, that is not what gets you marked down. And if Mark, hopefully not, but if he does fall over here, it won't be because of his stance as a social conservative and as a proud Christian person, happy to identify with his faith. Everyone knows who he is and what he stands for, but it's looking like he's going to hang on and very well done in the most difficult
circumstances. We'll let you go, but just before we want you back in probably 15 minutes.
I'm going to have some pizza.
Have some pizza, have some drinks. But when you come back in a little bit, make sure you get Mark on your show. I think it'd be great to have a review in coming weeks of how his campaign went, and just to confirm win or lose, and maybe see if he's got any tips on how the LNP can do better next time.
I'm sure he will.
Look, one of the things we want to do in the Good Source is thank our sponsors and supporters. Right now, we're sitting in a great studio, which is full of equipment that's been donated by the supporters. And one of the things that I want to say is big shout out to the electrician who has been working tirelessly to make this all happen. That's Ethos Electrical. Was working till 2 a.m. this morning, or actually later. I think it might have been well past 2:30, and just heaps and heaps of generous investment, because there's just so many people that are wanting to see conservative, true media replacing what's going on in Australia and in Queensland, and it's just really important that we have that kind of focus in the media, where we get to break the stranglehold that corporate media have. So, and to all the Good Source supporters, thank you very much for your donations, those small amounts that come through every week. As you can see, we've got designs on doing better every day, better every month, bringing you better news, better productions. And if you'd like to become a Good Source supporter, the place to do that is on our website. That's where you can get all our latest articles, the latest episodes of The Bernie Gaynor Show, The Lyle Shelton Show, Pillow Talk, Conservative One with George Christensen. There's so many good shows on this channel. And what we're doing is producing a platform which helps independent conservative voices just be more accessible for those people like yourself at home who want to see more of those voices that you're not going to get to see in the mainstream media. Bernie, what do you think about that it says about Mark Robinson's campaign, that somebody like Tony Abbott and somebody like Mark Robinson are targeted by a heavily subsidised independent, subsidised by GetUp, that you stand up for a pro-life position and be very conservative. Now, we saw Tony Abbott lose, of course, but it looks like Mark Robinson's increasing his margin.
Yeah, well, I think it says a few things. First of all, it says that the groups in our society who want to destroy people like Mark Robinson, Tony Abbott, and others are organised. They are organised, they are well funded, and they can run very strong campaigns. We saw they won against Tony Abbott. It looks like hopefully Mark will be able to hold on. That'll be close. But that should send a message to conservatives that we need to start organising ourselves much better than we have been. And I know for a fact, I know through my own battles, what I've had with my legal cases, that people are willing to donate, they are willing to assist, they are willing to help. But we need to, you know, I think, I'm going to keep bringing it up, on Tuesday night or Wednesday Australian time, we're going to see a lesson in America as to what we need to do here in Australia. The way we need to fund, the way we need to fight, if we're going to succeed in protecting core conservative values. And I think the Americans are far better at us than this on the conservative side. So, you know, there are these groups out there, obviously, who are very, very well organised on the left. We don't have anything like that yet on the right side of politics in Australia. That needs to change.
We have some comments here with, come and join us, Steve.
Thanks, Dave.
So, yeah, comments on YouTube. Kim Kennedy said, well said, Lyle. What we Conservatives need are more conviction politicians. Mark Robinson is certainly one of them. Is you looking for your power cord? Is that yours?
No.
Okay. What else do we have here? Just looking through these comments. If you, let me just promote those comments. If you'd like to join us in the comments section, you've got some insights, some breaking news maybe that we're not aware of or having said first, drop a comment in there. That would be fantastic. You also do us a favour and share the show that you're watching now, wherever you're watching it, on YouTube or Facebook. Invite your friends to watch it as well. we'll be probably going for about another half hour. Steve, what do you think are the most notable surprises from tonight?
Well, I think if you look over at the election itself, I think it might surprise people that it actually did come down to what people, actually thought it would be, and it's actually come to be, and that is it's been a referendum result on COVID-19. I think the audience out there throughout all of Queensland and Australia will now recognise this as you look across the Western democracies. We've now had 5 elections throughout our Western democracies in the Northern Territory, New Zealand, and all of the incumbents have won.
So true.
So we're now 5 for 5 on a COVID-19 2020 election result in all these jurisdictions. So tonight, as Bernard was saying earlier, the Queensland electorate, and you have to respect their vote because that's what we all value in our democracy, they have voted for a Palaszczuk government to be returned because they have believed in the security of the Palaszczuk government delivering them a COVID-19 safe result. I think if you now look at these things over the next 4 years, is where will Queensland be in 2024? And it might be a very hotly contestable election in 2024 on something that's not related to health. And we might come back to some of those critical issues that really didn't get a Guernsey because COVID-19 certainly did dominate this election. There is just no discussion about that. It's the proof's in the pudding. So, we'll be looking at, economic things. I heard earlier Bernard talking about job losses and the economy and things like that. You were very accurate in what you were saying. When you front up to a press conference every day and you are the lead person in a state every day, you do dominate the airwaves. And that's just the benefit of being the incumbent. And there's just nothing that you can really do logically to get away from that position of advantage that the incumbent has, because they literally do have that advantage, and that's what incumbency does bring. Now, these 5 elections and these 5 jurisdictions have brought total benefit to the total incumbent at the time.
The last time we saw a disaster favouring incumbents was in 2012 with the Campbell-Newman election. But it was really, really interesting because we had 2 incumbents going against each other. We had Anna Bligh, who was doing terribly until the floods, and then just soared in popularity, which again is what's happening. Maybe not the same kind of soar, but because of the floods. But then Campbell-Newman, who was Lord Mayor of Brisbane, also enjoyed that same benefit. So I think it was always predictable, especially after New Zealand and ACT and Northern Territory, that the incumbent was going to be favoured by the COVID result.
They certainly do start with a strong position of advantage. I think when you look back at Anna Bligh and Campbell-Newman, at that time there was a real seed for change, out there, and the vote of the day certainly demonstrated that with an historic win to the Conservatives on that particular time period. And so you look at it now and you juxtapose that against that election, you see, well, was there a real mood for change? And Bernard, going back to your earlier point, the mood probably was not for change because of the referendum-styled election that was cleverly constructed by Labor. And when, in a contest, you look at the strengths that you can bring to that particular field of battle that you're going into. And the Labor strategists were particularly clever at marketing themselves into what they knew would deliver them tonight's result, or what's predicted to certainly look like going to be an ALP victory tonight.
Yeah.
So they dealt into their strengths, and they stayed totally away from what they perceived may be the community's, examination of their weaknesses. But when you are Deb Frecklington and a Conservative Party and not being able to dominate the airwaves every day with being in front of these cameras, that's the lack of power that non-incumbency brings.
Yeah, and just on the whole COVID referendum, I think in many ways Victoria has loomed large in this election, because what Anastasia Palaszczuk has been able to do is say, we're not Victoria. And there's just been this media frenzy that, Victoria's in this state of disaster and everybody's dying down there. And I'm not belittling the 700 odd deaths that are there, and that's a terrible tragedy. But I just think that personally, I think that the reaction to COVID has been a complete hysteria and overreaction. But what Anastasia Palaszczuk has been able to do is say, if we open up, if we do anything, if you don't let me protect you, we're going to be Victoria. And Queenslanders have been scared into, well, we don't want to be Victoria, so we better just keep going with Anastasia.
Well, when you look at that point and drill down to it, the masterstroke there that the Labor Party brought into this election was that it could compare and contrast to Victoria, but it had one big advantage to it in that some of the Queensland economy, if not a lot of it, is functioning to a capacity. So you do have the mining industry functioning with its fly in, fly out workers. You do have Southeast Queensland functioning to a percentage point where it's not locked down. So the contrast for a person in Southeast Queensland or anywhere across the Central Coast and the minefields is we are going to work. We aren't going to work at the capacity maybe we wanted to, and there's certainly people, as we all know, that have been terribly struck down, like disastrously struck down economically. But Queensland was able to go to work vis-a-vis Victoria, and they were able to play up to that. Again, that's a strategy, looking at its strength, and they were able to deliver a strong message of we'll keep you safe health-wise, and as a consequence, we have got some economic activity as compared to Victoria. So your earlier comments were very straight and to the point that it was a COVID referendum election. I think history will look back in 2020 across all the elections that have been held in Western democracies, and they will just recognise that the governments were returned based on it being a health referendum election. This is an extremely unique circumstance in all Western democracies and their political systems and the elections. It will be very interesting as COVID gets to be, let's say beaten, and hopefully how the next elections across all Western democracies turn out, because it won't be a health election. It won't be a referendum election. It'll go back to those topics that I think yourselves and Lyle have earlier talked about tonight: social issues, economic issues. But Bern, I think you're more than 100% right. 2020 Queensland election has literally just been one issue election. It's been a health referendum election, and both parties will now recognise that. One party will get to celebrate the consequences of getting it exactly right, and the other party will look at it and probably say, we were always in a position where it was very hard when we couldn't dominate the media outlets because we weren't in front of those cameras every day. And incumbency in this case, with health and a referendum, has certainly trumped, no pun, has certainly trumped a position where you weren't incumbent, you couldn't dominate the media, and it was hard getting those messages out. And I think that's how everything will be reflected upon. Where the Conservatives go to from here? Well, that's a typical question that a lot of people will ask, but what will happen, obviously, is that the party machine and the party people will go back. They will chew down on these figures. They will get their sitting members of parliament together. They'll have a really big look at it. They'll look at where they could have gone better. They'll look at where they've gone well. But they'll probably come away from it thinking this has been a very difficult year, and we'll just take, stock, think about where we need to go, what messages we want to get out to people. They'll probably go and do some really good research into what the public generally want moving forward. Because in 2021, I was saying with you respectfully the other day, when Keeper and Seeker come to an end, Australia is going to really change in 2021 and 2022, because now the health will start to get a little bit better, hopefully a lot better with vaccines and improved health outcomes. But the battle now will be for us as a country and us as a state will now become a very dire economic battle. And that's going to be very, very interesting to watch, particularly in March, April of 2021, when these artificial stimuluses that have helped us so far as a country this year are taken away. And then I think that's going to be, Bernard and David and Lyle, a particularly interesting concept for the Australian public and the Queensland communities to take on. It's a real challenge.
And that's going to be a hard battle for the LNP in Queensland too, because, Labor state government debt in Queensland is out of control. It is 4 times bigger in Queensland per person than what it is in Victoria. So, and people hear numbers like $1 billion or $1 trillion. It's so large they don't even know what they mean, or they mean so much percentage of GDP. It just doesn't mean anything to most people. So, to tackle this issue, the LNP needs to sell it in a way that people understand. And this is the way I understand it. Every person in Queensland right now owes $20,000 in debt for the state government. So any child born tonight is born to a debt of $20,000. And that debt has been borrowed over the last 10 or 12 years by and large. So in effect, the state government has purchased a brand new car for every single Queenslander, not just per family, every single Queenslander. So a family of 5, the state government's gone away and borrowed money to buy the equivalent of 5 cars for them over the last decade. Now, that is unsustainable. But the problem the LNP is going to have in Queensland is that at the moment, the Commonwealth government has just blown that debt out of the water. The budget handed down federally means that every Australian is going to be about $80,000 in debt for Commonwealth. So people are starting to rack up a mortgage just in government debt at the moment. It's just not sustainable. But the Conservative politicians need to start explaining that in a way that makes sense to people. Just saying it's so much percentage of GDP or so many billions of dollars, it becomes meaningless to most people.
I think you're right. I think the Conservative parties, particularly in Queensland now, will really start to have a good examination of strategic issues that matter to communities. And I think we would all recognise, everyone in the room and everyone out there watching tonight, that the Labor Party does 2 things very well. They dominate the 2 very centrist topics of health and education. I think if you think ALP, you go to those buzzwords straight away, health and education. And I think the Conservative parties have the word economic as their buzzword. But underneath that, you really need to tear apart what that means to communities. And that's a challenge going forward, and it's a good challenge because we all need an open dialogue about what our democracy can bring. And the parties really are on notice, I believe, going forward into the 2024 election, that this election result tonight is, as you said earlier, is a pandemic election. If we had taken away COVID-19, literally, and it didn't exist, and that would be a great thing, we might be having a different discussion tonight across the Queensland community about how this election could have panned out. But what we do know is in 2024 is that there'll be a more high energy focus on non-COVID, and we'll probably have an election based on what it would have been like in 2020. So it's going to be interesting to watch the next 4 years, guys, because I think we need to strap in. I think you'll see a resurgence of conservative economic issues and social issues. And I think you're going to see a delineation there of the health because COVID will dissipate. And I think we just have to be patient and just watch for those 4 years. And patience is a virtue. There's a lot of people out there who still believe in conservatism and all those things economically and socially that matter. And it's now up to the new party members and the party existing members to now take that message out, develop the messages that are relevant to people, and literally, as we say in business, just start to communicate and sell those messages in a way that people hear. And I think, Bern, that goes to your point, in a way that people hear and it resonates with them. And let's just see how the next 4 years unfold. But at tonight, it's a COVID ALP, by the looks of it, electoral victory. And we just have to just accept that 5 out of 5 for COVID-19, it's just rewarded sitting governments.
Let's have a look at some of the results, some of the data. You're the numbers man. Now, we see One Nation has lost 9.6% of their last election results. They've had 9.6% of the state vote go away from them, and their votes seem to be flowing to Labor. Do you think their losses are directly attributed to COVID, or is there something else that you could point to as perhaps affecting the One Nation vote in this election?
Well, I think the One Nation vote always goes down on the optic vision of their leader being seen. And when you're looking across southeast Queensland, we didn't see the leader of One Nation much anywhere. In fact, I don't think I saw her anywhere, be it on a billboard or, particularly anywhere. And I think when you don't see the people, you forget them. And I think also, David, we all have to recognise that politics is an expensive industry, and that advertising and social media and that is not a cheap thing. And you can only get yourself out there to what you can afford. And the minor parties are very severely constrained by their income sources. And if they don't get the votes that they're used to getting, or they dissipate, then their income dissipates. So I think you're seeing Pauline Hanson's One Nation party being restricted in its ability to advocate and promote itself and advertise for itself based on its budget. And therefore you're seeing a shrinking market because it's messages that it wants to get out.
Yeah.
And that's up to the electorate to decide what they make of those messages, simply aren't getting out to the volume that they would like.
Yeah.
So then you take that vote that's not being heard by the punters, and then they go, well, I'm not hearing any messages. Who am I hearing from? I'm hearing from the Australian Labor Party, I'm hearing from the Liberal National Party, and I'm hearing from the Greens. And up in North Queensland, Robbie Katter's party have got a phenomenal following in those seats.
Yeah.
And Robert has a very strong presence.
Yeah.
And he's well known up there. And so he's able to position his party very well in the seats that matter in North Queensland. So he's not spreading himself, as we say, across 93 seats. He's targeting very specific seats and doing it very, very well. And as a result, Robert's party's vote has gone up quite nicely tonight. He'd be very proud of how his party's tracking. If you look at the results in Tragar, which is Robbie's, seat, it's phenomenal. It's 60+%.
Yeah.
You can't say that he doesn't own his own electorate. You look at Shane Knuth and Hill, it's the same thing there. So the Katter Party are not only consolidating, but just growing nicely, their North Queensland vote. And the One Nation Party, I think, David, had their results curtailed by their lack of money. I really think that's exactly showing through in the votes tonight.
Bernie, do you think, do you have a different opinion? Is there anything that's particularly affecting One Nation's result right now? What would you be advising them if you were heading back to the drawing board in their private meetings tomorrow?
Well, I think it's been a bit of a strange campaign from One Nation. I certainly haven't seen a lot of Pauline, and I don't know why that is. Maybe she just wasn't on the communication channels that I was tuned into, but I do get a sense potentially that there is a bit of a difference of opinion between Pauline and the Queensland's One Nation Party, and that might have been over some of these social issues. So I think One Nation gave it quite a strong platform on abortion. I'm not sure Pauline is so supportive of that. I know Pauline personally is in favour of euthanasia, but I think a lot of their candidates ran against it. So it seems to me that there is a history in One Nation of a rise in popular support for Pauline Hanson's personal brands, but she is unable to build a political party that functions effectively.
Yep.
I think what's interesting too, when I look through some of these results, and I have been during the night, is when you're looking at specific seats, David and Bernard and Lyle with the Greens, if you look in Caloundra, 10.7% at the moment, just on voting alone for the Greens. If you look at Chatsworth, an inner city seat there of Brisbane, which the LNP hold with member Steve Minikin, we've got 8.52%. And then if you move, which was an interesting seat.
Is he going to hold that seat?
It's trending towards a very marginal win for the LNP in Chatsworth. Postal votes are going to have a very strong determination on how that flows, and they'll come in during the next few days.
With Mark Robinson gaining ground in that area of Queensland and that same neck of the woods, and Steve Minikin now having a severe battle, I think you can probably draw a contrast between the two candidates. You've got Mark Robinson, who's strongly conservative, and Steve Minikin, who crossed the floor and voted with Jackie Trad on her abortion bill. Maybe that didn't have a lot to do with how the whole electorate voted, but what do you think the LNP is going to be thinking about that seat? What are they possibly going to be changing to try and secure that better over the next 4 years?
You meaning Chatsworth or Drew?
Chatsworth.
Well, Chatsworth is, and I was saying to Bernard earlier,
supposing they get to keep it. I mean, otherwise they're going to have to.
Yeah. Okay. So let's have a look at that they keep it, but they're fighting off a very strong Green insurgents there. And remember also, a few things for your viewers to know too is that the Greens hold a very commanding position in the federal seat of Terry Butler, which is just across the area there, Norman Park in Griffith, but Norman Park, Seven Hills, Ballimba, Balmoral. But there's this very strong inner city trend of Green, which is now coming over towards
Leading out.
Camp Hill and Carina Heights. Going back to Bernard's earlier analysis tonight of how he saw it with this COVID referendum, Carina and Carina Heights, particularly down there in the nursing homes and the aged care facilities, there's quite a few of them in the electorate of Chatsworth. If they have bought into a strong keep me safe, protect me from COVID message from the Labor Party's Premier Anastasia, then it's been a masterstroke from them to go to that strength. And if you look, particularly on Richmond Road there, you've got an extremely large nursing home there, very populated, and you go in through the other parts of the area, there's a down towards Dursden Street there, or Nursden Street, sorry, in Carina Heights, with the Presbyterian nursing home there. It's a large volume of people there that have been possibly swayed to do a COVID-19 vote. When you look at Mark and what's happening down there in Udjuru, it's been a very strategic run campaign there by the peoples down there. It's been similar to the 2017 Redlands campaign, when all the candidates basically made the LNP last and made it near impossible for the Conservative LNP to win.
Very tough on Mark and Udjuru.
And so this is another copybook on how to gang up against one particular person or one particular party.
Do you know how the One Nation preferences ended up in Udjuru? There was a little bit of back and forth on that.
The One Nation vote, you'd have to ask them how they split their vote, because they won't enunciate it. It does look, just based on what I've been hearing, reading and analysing, Anthony Green, and then Peter Gleeson, Sky News, James McGrath, etc., etc. So you've got a whole myriad of observers there, that the One Nation vote is been splitting 50-50.
Well, it probably is, because one of the things about One Nation is that they might have a candidates, but they don't have a team on the ground.
No.
And unless you've got someone handing out how to vote cards and voters who are willing to follow that in a disciplined kind of fashion, it doesn't really matter what One Nation says about their preferences, because the voter's still making the choice at the end of the day.
I think what we need to also recognise across the state election tonight is not to be preoccupied with the split of the One Nation party, whilst it's interesting and it is important. But when you're just looking at the numbers, and numbers just are purely, they don't have an opinion, they're fact. Everyone loves their facts. I'm just looking here.
We can project our opinion on the numbers.
You can. But I mean, you're just looking at the Green vote in Ferny Grove, 14.69%. Now that's a phenomenal. That's phenomenal for them. You look at Cooper, 31.28%, and you look at Clayfield. Now Clayfield is being discussed all across all the media outlets as we speak too. And Clayfield, I'm just looking at this stunning figure for the Greens, is 16.52% in the Green vote, 47% to Tim Nichols and 31.7% to the ALP. That is extremely neck and neck.
Yep.
And there's a componentry in the Clayfield electorate called the suburb of Kedron. So for all of David's viewers, in the city Brisbane, on the north side, there's a suburb called Kedron, and that's widely recognised as strong Wayne Swan federal territory and strong ALP, and they call that Tiger, the Tiger area of the electorate of Clayfield. And that's starting to make its presence very widely felt within that electorate. And I was just looking at Sky News earlier tonight, and Campbell Newnham was very concerned about the electorate of Clayfield and how it was unfolding. But the one thing you can't escape, and I'm just looking here at Greenslopes, so for your viewers, ALP at 41%, the Liberal National Party at 31%, and the Greens at near 24%. So for your viewers out there, Greenslopes is right next. Greenslopes is a seat, but it's also a suburb, but it's right next to the seat of Chatsworth, which is Steve Minikin, and they've had a large upswing in the Green vote. So you're getting this trend within Brisbane CBD, the very close inner city suburbs, of the emergence of the Greens. And you go to McConnell, which is right where Grace, the Education Minister, is there. And I don't know if we can have a quick look at those figures, but I think you'll be very interested to see there as 28.21% for the Greens on a primary vote in inner city Brisbane. The first suburb is New Farm, Newstead, for your viewers out there, Dave. And ALP's 36%, and the Liberal National Party's 31%. So you're seeing, we don't get preoccupied, but we seem to, in the media, I think we talk a little bit about Pauline Hanson's One Nation. But I think what needs to be recognised out of tonight, two things that you've brought up, particularly the first one, this is a COVID referendum without fail, and you're spot on. The second thing that really needs to be taken away from this is the very sharp increase in primary votes of the Green in inner city areas, and it's nothing that's not new, and it's been growing, and now it's a real challenge for all the parties, and it's a challenge for the Labor Party too, because they might now see themselves as being manipulated and mastered by the Greens, and the Greens really challenge,
And they really are.
and the Greens do challenge
So, Steve,
both major parties.
I'm just about to swap out with Lyle, but I do have a question for you. You know, if this is a COVID referendum, you know, that's the Labor vote. They voted on COVID for Anastasia. I think we also need to recognise that the Green vote, the growing Green vote in Brisbane, has not really. It's not a COVID vote because the Greens haven't put forward a plan for COVID, so they're voting for the Greens for some. They've ignored COVID to go for the Greens for some other reason. You know, and so that's a very environmental, climate change, and socially focused vote, which, you know, it should concern us. They're focused on those issues. Anyway, I'll step out for a bit, and Lyle can jump in.
Next, we're going to have a chat to Joel Jamal from Sydney, who's a great Conservative commentator. And Joel, I want to welcome you to the show tonight. How are you doing?
Very good. Yourself?
Doing very well, thank you. Just waiting to get you on. We've got you on. Fantastic. Joel, are you surprised at all by the election result in Queensland tonight?
No, not at all. In fact, people asked me a similar sort of question when the New Zealand election result happened a couple of weeks ago. I made it very clear my feelings towards all elections this year during the COVID pandemic. I said on the 29th of August to Ricardo Bossi in the launch episode of The Arc with Ricardo Bossi on the 29th of August, I said, mark my words, anyone that's up for re-election this year, including Trump, including Jacinta Ardern, you know, this crosses political lines, they will get re-elected. Crises always work to get people re-elected. And in the minds of the people in these areas, you don't hit the pilot while they're still flying the plane, if you know what I mean. They'd rather continuation than rock the boat. And that's why I'm certain, and that's why I'm wearing this hat, that's why I'm certain Trump will win, and possibly in a landslide. I'm not even ruling out a 49-state landslide. I honestly think that explains the trends we're seeing. It's a psychological one. You know, people, they can reflect whatever feeling they have towards this election, but I think it's a psychological one, and that's intellectually honest when you look at it and you apply that to both sides of the political spectrum.
Do you think the LNP will be taking any lessons from this defeat, this loss, where they've not even picked up a single seat but have lost 3 or 4?
I don't think they will, but I think the people will. And I think we called it I think Ricardo called it a couple of weeks ago, the Liberal National Party. He was told that they had given up a few weeks ago. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know. But the point must be made that the Liberal Party, I can't see them. I don't have a lot of faith in them to reform the party and to move forward. I really don't. I'd like them to come out and be more transparent with their voters and be more in tune with their voters. But I'm not holding my breath.
Thank you very much for joining us tonight, Joel, and we really, really love your hat. Go Trump for 2020. Thanks
for having me. A pleasure.
Lyle, are there any other seats that you are aware of while you've been sitting down that have got some upsetting or surprising results? Question without notice?
Yeah, it is without notice. I was scrolling through. Look, I think we've pretty much covered in Steve's excellent analysis there. I think, just to recap, I think there'll be great disappointment in LNP circles tonight that the seat of Mansfield wasn't won. That was, the slimmest of margins, one of the most marginal seats in the state. They should have taken that. Formerly an LNP seat, and as we said, Janet Wishart, a terrific candidate there, has missed out. I think they would have had hopes, obviously for Aspley. Steve will know some of the other seats better. I think up North Queensland, I'm not sure what's happened in those 3 Townsville seats, Steve.
Yeah, so what's happened there is that the ALP maybe will lose one, but they're on a knife edge of keeping two. So there's no strong suggestion to suggest that the LNP will be in a position to claim any of those seats. However,
that's extraordinary. I mean,
however, there is a large postal contingency vote to come in, and if it's this close, then postal votes are often the change agent that you never expect, but actually can happen. But I would have thought in a normal option of hopefully changing a government, if you were the LNP, that you would by now have been able to at least comfortably suggest that at least two of those seats were coming your way, if not all three.
I find that amazing. We've talked a lot about the dynamics in southern Queensland, but it's often been said that this is an election that's happening in two parts, one in the south and one in the north. And with the crime problems in Townsville, been very well publicised for a long time. You would have thought the voters would have given Labor a much bigger kick. And then there's, of course, the mining issues, northern development, the tourism issues that have been hurt so badly by the COVID lockdown. And yet that doesn't seem to have affected Labor. It's almost like bad behaviour has been rewarded up in North Queensland.
But it's interesting, Lyle, when you talk about the crime. I was talking about this with one of the other commentators for the last 2 weeks, possibly, and even longer, was that crime was never an issue that resulted in any seats being lost at the last election, when it was rampantly not good either. And we talk about rail fail as another themed option that never materialised into change of seats. And rail fail was for the viewers out there, was a corridor of rail from Brisbane CBD out to the western suburbs, out to Ipswich. So if you look on your line, it's like going from Sydney CBD out to Redfern, or out that way, or not Redfern, Penrith, all that way. It was just that western corridor. And rail fail, with things not running on time, not being delivered, and delays, it still didn't deliver any change of seats. So I've seen historically, Lyle and David, I've seen rail fail and crime, which seems logical on the outside when you look at it. Surely these will be electoral changing issues that possibly again tonight haven't resulted in anything material except for incumbency of the seats.
It is remarkable how shallow the electorate can be with very, very short, like 5-minute memories.
Yeah, I understand the comments when you say that it's interesting that the electorate is shallow, but you have to understand and respect that if this is what they decide is not important to them, then it's probably obviously when it gets this close, there must be something that is important to them. Because if crime won't be rewarded with a vote, then okay, that's 2 out of 2 that recognise it hasn't been. It seems illogical with all the data that's there. It does seem illogical. But if it's not an issue, and they're proving to you twice now that it's not an issue, then there has to be something. And I think the only way you can go and find out is to go and ask them, okay, what makes you want to either A, keep, or B, change, and find out from them. And maybe, as hard as it is to get a head around the fact that crime, which could be so data-drivenly proven to be out of control, is still not enough of a change agent to bring about changes of seats. And the discipline is to look at it and, yes, shake our head, or shake your head, or shake one's head, but to actually go, okay, what I think is important to you, you're actually demonstrating with your penciled vote is not as important as I thought it was. I don't understand it. Can I have a cup of coffee? Can we as a community get together and analyse why you don't think in your electorate that this crime issue is not important? Because we need to understand that.
Maybe it was the stadium after all.
And what a great optic that was too.
Brilliant.
We talk about strategy.
Yeah. Anyway. No, well, and it looks like, David, and this is one thing I did pick up while I was sitting out, is the media now very much calling this as high likelihood that this will be a majority government, that Anastasia Palaszczuk won't have to form some sort of working arrangement with the Greens. And
praise God for small mercies.
Well, look, it is a small mercy, but it's a wafer thin small mercy, if I can put it that way. She stood up at the Queensland Press Club yesterday, as she did throughout the whole campaign, and asked for Queenslanders to give her a majority government. They've done that.
Mm.
But I think, as we've said, I was very interested in the discussion you were having and the questions Bernie was raising earlier. Those Greens, whilst not having a seat around the cabinet table in some sort of a power sharing arrangement, will still have a very significant influence in this parliament.
And the media will give them that as well.
They will, and they will have a megaphone because they could have 4 MPs in this parliament.
They will speak far louder than Candidate Party
Absolutely.
ever get to be
And
heard.
the interesting thing too, for the viewers that are watching David's show too, is that the one thing that comes with winning seats or votes is money. So now the Greens Party
$9 each.
are now going to receive a very healthy deposit into their bank account because these numbers are showing on their primary votes that they're hitting good economic targets for their bank balances. And so, of course, a well-funded party can now make more inroads into the community because it can do 2 things: be heard and get its message out. Yeah. So it's a challenging time for the Queensland electorate.
It's very challenging.
Let's see how the next 4 years pan out. It's going to be very interesting to watch at the Parliament.
Well, I think if the Conservative, we're talking about how do we rebuild, how does the Conservative side of politics rebuild from what I think is really a catastrophic result tonight for Conservative politics. The Greens are going to have this megaphone. They're going to be well funded, as you've just said, Steve. They're going to have that platform within the Parliament. We really do need to see the prosecution of the arguments step forward and come up another level. I don't think it's going to be good enough anymore for the Conservative side of politics to try and have this sort of white bread centrist type approach to the issues. We're going to have to start prosecuting the arguments because this is going to have economic consequences for the state. If these people's policy ideas get the platform that they're going to have, their social ideas that we were talking about earlier, if the challenge isn't met, and it's going to require some truth telling in the electorate. The electorate have not heard the truth about why the Greens' policy ideas cannot work, do not work. I mean, the placards that they had in South Brisbane, where I live, they're going to provide all this extra funding for healthcare and education. And it's all going to be funded by mining royalties. Well, if you could just simply, pluck the goose that's laying the golden egg, and that will solve all your problems for your policy grab bag of wishes.
I think my closing comment to your show tonight and to all of us here tonight would be, it's a COVID referendum result. It's just totally, that's what it is. I think also when you now look at the next 4 years, I think you'll see the Conservative Party doing what all parties do when they have these type of results. They have to go away, they have to do a self-analysis, they have to do a review, and that's got to be done respectfully and allow all for the inputs that come through. It has to be done in a considered way and not, hysterically, because there'll be a lot of disappointment there, and rightly so. I mean, there's been a lot of people in the organisation, there's been a lot of people handing out how to votes, and there's been a lot of people volunteering who've tried their very best, and probably nights like tonight aren't the best nights to say what you think. Sometimes it's good to go to bed and just like children. It's sometimes you don't give them a tap.
What's been the fruit of these reviews in the past, though? I mean, Labor have been in power for 25 of the last 30 years in the state of Queensland. They're now going to get another 4 years. There's reviews after each of these failures. We've had yet another one.
It's always more of the same.
So it's going to be interesting with the reviews. Well, why don't we just watch what happens?
Who do you think will do it, Steve?
Certainly not me, and probably not you and David. But there's opportunities out there always.
And I actually disagree, Steve. I think we absolutely do need to talk about it. That's our particular job.
We do need to talk about it, but let's just let tonight fall where it falls. But
I don't think there's any need to do that.
I do.
We've been watching it. I heard you.
I know you did.
We've been watching it for a week, a month, a year, 3 years. We've been reviewing and watching the whole time, and the outcome was always predictable. LNP do not differentiate themselves. They chase the ABC vote. They're afraid of getting bad reviews by ABC journalists. If they just lost that fear alone, they would change their election results. They would stop being annihilated electorally. If they stopped chasing the centre and they started being the Liberal Conservative Party that Menzies created, that Howard nurtured, if they actually returned to their roots and were faithful and authentic and started accepting Conservative members in their ranks, then they would find their fortunes greatly improved and maybe even win government. I'd be happy to come and help them do the review if they need some help with that. But I'm not sure that they're actually interested in the honest truth, which is a shame because I want them to win. I really don't want the alternative. The ALP must be defeated at any cost. Well, not at any cost. That's a silly thing to say. But it's certainly very important that they be defeated. But we're going to see the ALP end up with an increased majority. They're going to be 51 seats, more than likely. The Liberal Party, LNP, is going to be 35, and that's just pathetic. We've got the right ideas. We've got the truth. We're actually pro-science in all kinds of areas of biology where these people are off with the fairies. But
so do you think it's time if and Bernie's been labouring about this all night, and I have a lot of sympathy for what he's saying. If Trump wins again on the 3rd of November, next Wednesday, Thursday, whatever time it is our time, is that the message to Conservatives? Putting aside the obnoxious parts of Trump's personality and his rudeness and his crashness and his egotism and all of that, but the fact that he has pursued conservative policies, he's secured the borders, he's stood up to China on the way it was rigging the economics, etc. He's rebuilding the military. He stopped the managed decline of the US nation that we were seeing under the Democrats, and which we will see if Joe Biden is re-elected. This idea that America is not exceptional, that it should just continue to fade away and let the Chinese Communist Party, rise to world ascendancy. If Trump wins and is rewarded at the ballot box, is that something that Conservatives in Australia should contemplate and see if they can aggressively is the wrong word, but robustly pursue a policy agenda, minus the egotism and the
I think aggressive is the right word. Arrogantly isn't. But at the moment, what we have is apologetically. I think we absolutely need to say, hey, there is no centre position between right and wrong. We need to be right.
Well, Trump has drawn the battle lines.
You can't change gender. There's no centre point on this. Can you change gender? No, you can't. It's a grammatical reference to a biological reality that's the same from beginning to end.
It's clear there's a big contest for ideas going on in the American election, and it's clear that the Democrats under Biden and Kamala Harris are moving further and further to a very radical left agenda. He said he's going to shut down the oil industry, the fossil fuels industry, and this is radical stuff. Labor and the Greens here believe this stuff as well.
Maybe we should keep following the good source and watching the electoral information that's going to be coming probably over the next 4 days.
That is a great note to end the night on.
When we look at the 2020 result, it's COVID-19. And as for the review of the Liberal National Party, let's see where they go. And maybe patience is a virtue. And let's just see what they do. And if we look under,
you're right. And if patience is a virtue.
And if we look under the hood, and we don't like what we see the review is, then as Conservative people, you have an option to express that through your local elected members of Parliament that are Conservative, and take that path. And if you want to get involved in the Liberal National Party, then to all the people out there who aren't members of the Liberal National Party and who don't like what they see tonight in terms of the outcome for what they think is the right way to have their community being governed, then you have to do pretty much two things. One, stop observing it and actually get in there and become a member. And the Liberal National Party will probably be in an economic and business position where it'll be looking for new people to come into the party because they'll welcome their enthusiasm and they'll welcome their ideas and they'll welcome their participation. And let's just take tonight as it's a COVID-19 referendum. It's 5 for 5 for Western democracies. This is not a surprise. And Now we move on to 2024, and where I think you'll see a real contestability of things. But David, let's see how contestable the Liberal National Party wants to be on issues that surround the communities, and likewise we'll see what the ALP wants to contest on its issues with the community. But I think 2024 will not be a replication of 2020, and I think the data will be different in that time. But we'll wait for 4 years and see how we go.
And patience is the right word. What we need is for more people to join the LNP or whatever party you want. If you're a Labor voter, then join the Labor Party, but join them to make it better. And I hope you're not a Labor voter, because I think there's increasingly stark differences between the parties today, and to be a supporter of the Labor Party is to be a supporter of abortion and euthanasia and those unequivocal evils and violations of human rights and justice. And we need more people to join the party that they prefer, the Liberal national parties, essentially to give them some strength and some conviction and some courage to do what's necessary, to do what it takes to defeat these horribly toxic, deceptive leftist ideas, which are so pro-death and anti-human and anti-freedom, the most illiberal things plaguing our society. And what we need is more freedom, less government. But as Steve said, it is a long game that requires patience on our part. We're not going to change things in one election cycle. It may take many election cycles. And if it takes a generation, then so be it. We need to start that now. But thank you very much to Lyle Shelton, host of the Lyle Shelton Show, available on The Good Source, and to Bernard Gaynor, host of the Bernard Gaynor Show, also available on The Good Source, and to my good friend Steve Kyler, economist, numbers man extraordinaire, and frequent guest on Pillow Talk, which is my show, and that's every Tuesday night. If you would like to get more of The Good Source, we would really appreciate to hear more from you. This has been a little bit rough tonight. No thanks at all to a huge power blackout costing precious setup time and internet access and all kinds of other things. And literally this studio was gotten to a stage of readiness less than 24 hours ago. So it's been a great trial, fun thing. Yeah, Steve's kicking me under the table saying, thank the production team. Of course, a huge thank you to so many volunteers who have helped put this together. And perhaps I would have to say my biggest vote of thanks and expression of gratitude goes to Brent the Builder, who has given weeks and weeks of full days to actually renovate this little old shed into something that's looking really beautiful, really professional, and is going to be a great asset for the culture wars for Conservatives and Christians, so that we can produce a better quality consistently of good media, alternate media, and those resources that will help us educate voters so that they have a memory slightly longer than 5 minutes. But that's also, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, everyone, for tonight. And apologies we couldn't get more comments in tonight. We'll work on that in this new setup, and look forward to seeing you again. We're going to try and do this again for the US election in just a few nights. So we'll see how that goes. Stay tuned to the stations, and we will talk to you soon. Good night.